It looks like Hogwarts. And if you were to read the rhetorical message of this, just this academic space, I mean, look at it. This is Syracuse University. And who are we kidding? It looks like Hogwarts. And if you were to read the rhetorical message of this space, from the architecture to the layout of this campus, I think a message of prestige, tradition, and a sense of exclusivity are definitely communicated. Which leads me to my third and most prominent theme for this talk, access. Access in the sense of access for all humans in these said institutional spaces. So back to my narrative. In the flurry of the new job whirlwind of orientations, welcome events, and general newness, I forgot to fill out my I-9. Does everyone know what the I-9 is? Right, it's the paperwork required of all legally documented workers in this country, and it is the direct result of the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act that requires employers to verify that all newly hired employees present what is termed facially valid documentation verifying the employee's identity and legal authorization to work in the United States. The I-9, or as it is formally titled, the Employment Eligibility Verification Form, is provided by the federal government for that purpose. So, if you didn't know the intricate details about this form or that it was instituted with and is tied to immigration reform in this country, consider the fact that it's just not something you've had to think about. And admittedly, the details associated with this form weren't part of my own awareness until this form became a problem of access for me, which is pretty much how privilege and oppression works, isn't it? Whereas privilege is the stuff we generally don't think about because with privilege, access is open, the world is open. Oppressive structures present themselves as barriers. Barriers to the access you didn't know you were barred from until the bars are figuratively and sometimes literally blocking your way. So in the pile of paperwork we're usually required to fill out when we're beginning a new job, I never really paid the I-9 much mind. In fact, because of the 9 in its name, because of the 9 in its name, I admittedly didn't distinguish it much from the, from the W-9, and this was my mistake. Thus, within my first week on campus, an emphasis on our key concept, human here, but human resources called this form to my attention with the following email. And I'm going to focus in here on the bolded font part that says, our records indicate that you have not yet completed your I-9. Unfortunately, because you are not in compliance, we are required to temporarily suspend your employment effective immediately. All right, so in terms of some audience engagement and interaction, let's think together about the composition and rhetorical message of an email like this. As a reminder, I was within my first week on campus, orienting and preparing to start this job, as can be noted by the date here above in the corner. Okay. I think another important detail to note about that date and timestamp of this email is that it was 4:38 p.m. I'm the kind of person who has my email linked to my phone, and I'll admit here before God and you all as witnesses that I'm also the kind of person who has my phone in hand during most waking hours of the day. So I received this email in all its bold font glory pretty much as soon as it was sent. And does anyone want to guess how I reacted? Yes, like this guy. I mean, it was a new job. It was a form I had overlooked in an admittedly privileged way, which I'll get into further in a minute. And oh, here's the real kicker. As I noted, the email was sent at 4:38 p.m. and come to find out, Syracuse HR closed at 4:30 that day. And I know I already mentioned my hour-long commute, so add distance as salt to this increasing wound. So yes, this guy's face accurately captures how I felt in that moment. Luckily, this all occurred on a Thursday, so I still had the opportunity to drive back up the next day to right this apparent wrong. Now, back to the concept of being human. In this body that is societally raced, gendered, aged, etc. And when thinking about access for this body in academic spaces that look like, and let me get us there, this, I believed, and my use of the past tense here is intentional, I believed that on the days I wanted to be treated like the PhD and professor that I am, I needed to, quote, dress the part. As the old adage says, dress for the job you want, right? But before I proceed in this story, and I know this meme makes light of what I'll detail next, I'd like for us all to consider if this adage can be applied equally to all humans occupying the intersections that our bodies represent, especially in spaces that are marked explicitly or implicitly as traditionally accessible for whites, males, for able-bodied, and cisgender folk. And this is where the story really begins. For what was probably the last time in my life, I still attempted to, again, quote, dress the part, fully conscious that I am not what folk expect to see when they think of, and this is in a very race, class, and gendered way, but I'm not what is expected when they envision what a professor looks like. Just Google the word professor, which I've done for you here. Thus, in my attempt to look like a professor that day, I took precaution in the selection of my clothing. I drove the hour to campus in the morning, allowing myself plenty of time for possible delays. And I checked and then double checked that I had my necessary documents of verification for the I-9 on my person, which are my school assigned ID and my passport. When I walked into the HR office, I was reassured to hear a person already at the desk asking for his own overlooked I-9 to complete. And I say reassured because although I was dressed the part, although this job was the second in my career as a professor, although I made it through the years of obtaining a doctorate to have the letters after my name to prove it, I still suffer an acute case of imposter syndrome, not an uncommon affliction for those of us whose bodies are in spaces not traditionally constructed for us. So yes, relief and reassurance is what I felt when I saw and heard a white male requesting the very form I was there to fill. Relief that I was in the right location, relief that I wasn't the only one who had made this oversight, and reassured all would be well. When it was my turn to be greeted by the human resources employee at the front desk, I approached with a smile and requested the form. However, the HR employee, a middle-aged white woman, did not return my smile. If anything, my smile was met with a look of puzzlement before she asked, "Are you employed here?" Now it was my turn to look puzzled because her question threw me. I paused before I could construct an answer, and stuttering a bit, I said, and then I was finally able to eject, "Yes, I'm faculty." This human resources worker leaned back a bit in her chair to take in a full appraisal of me, and I felt my brows furrow into a frown that made its way to my mouth as I began to say in a barely discernible whisper, "Do I need to produce my school ID?" But she spoke over me and with a dismissive hand said, "Okay, here's the form and a pen, fill it out over there," as she gestured toward the waiting area chairs. I took the form from her and did as directed, seating myself away from the desk, away from this confusing interaction, and I filled out the form completely. When finished, I reapproached the HR worker's desk, handed her my completed form with the accompanying required passport as evidence of my legal status to work in this country. She took the form without a word, passed her eyes over it briefly, and I hovered midway between the desk and waiting area, not sure where to place my body in this increasingly hostile feeling space. And then I watched her eyes narrow to a point on the form from which she looked up, lips pursed, and asked me, "Is this your SUID number?" Again, she stunned me, and flustered, but now accompanied with a spark of growing anger in my gut, I reached for my school-assigned ID card, a photo ID card that displays my face directly next to my, where is it? SUID number, and offered it to her directly, saying, "The number is here, right next to the picture of my face." At the moment I realized she was messing with me, she realized I was on to her, and she almost defensively, waving my card away, said, "No, it's fine. I believe you. Here, you can take your passport. I'll put the paper in your file. Have a nice day." I left the office searching my mind for any plausible excuse for her behavior. It's Friday. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she had a bad week. Maybe there are problems at home. But then I remembered the smile she had for the white man before me. Then I remembered this is the form employees fill out to prove citizenship and or legal status to work in this country. Then I remembered we were about to vote on a presidential candidate who described Mexican immigrants as rapists and drug dealers. Then I remembered my dressing the part did not mask or disguise my own Mexicanness to this HR worker. And I remembered my context. Syracuse University, a private, predominantly and historically white institution in the northern US borderlands, a space where my existence is of reasonable suspicion. I recount this experience because I think it's important, while within the context of pointing out, sure, the pretty clear bias and discrimination on the part of the HR worker, to also reflect meaningfully on privilege, my privilege. To that point in my life, I'd enjoyed the privilege of not having to think deeply about what the I-9 was, where it came from, what it was connected to sociopolitically in this country. I'd had the privilege of my citizenship in this country, a privilege I was born into, not something I worked for or earned, not to worry about how I would work legally in this country. I have enjoyed the privilege of being able to use other documents my citizenship affords me, such as a social security number and a US passport or birth certificate, to prove my eligibility. Because my citizenship has been a given and a constant in my life, I have enjoyed the privilege of not really having to know what an I-9 was until this form became a representative oppressive structure barring my access to employment. And were it not for the context of this country in which laws like this SB 1070 that I have here on the slide are the lived reality for those whose bodies are reasonably suspicious in spaces not meant for us, then I suppose my privilege tied to my citizenship may have stayed intact. And I would have gone on in my ignorance concerning the I-9.